Hi everyone, it's Kathy. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm excited to share a fun fall project. Today we'll be creating a super simple fall banner. I'll be using a variety of products from Whimsy Stamps, including the shiplap background stamp, the Shaker Maker banner die set, my favorite Build a Pumpkin Patch die set, the Cutie Alphabet die set, the Daisies embossing folder, and the large 6x9 Dottie stencil. In the interest of time, I die cut all of the pieces off camera. For my little banner pieces, I decided that I wanted to add some texture, so I used the shiplap background stamp, and I inked it up with a green ink so I would have the tone-on-tone look to that background just to add a little bit of texture. Then to really draw out the edges of the banner pieces, I used blackjack ink and an ink blending brush and just did some light ink blending just around the very edges. Next, I decided to start working on my white pumpkin, and I forgot to show you that I used my spring ovals die set as well because I wanted to have that extra dimension to the pumpkin by having that centerpiece raised up a little bit higher. I used the Dottie stencil on the white pumpkins, and I did 2 of these, but I'm only going to share how I did 1. I used a little bit of temporary adhesive to hold that center oval on the top of the pumpkin. I placed the stencil on top, and then with the same blackjack ink, I did very light ink blending. I did that mostly so I would know where to line up the stencil when I put it back on the oval centerpiece as well as the pumpkin itself. This time I came in with a pretty heavy hand and darkened up those circles. Now to do the pumpkin, the key trick here is to get those circles lined up is don't clean the stencil. That way you can see where you inked on the stencil when you place it back on top of the pumpkin. I hope that makes sense. And again, I came in with a much heavier hand this time to get those polka dots nice and dark. I wanted the pumpkins to have a green stem and vine. So I did a little bit of creative die cutting so I would just have that piece there, and then I trimmed a little bit off the bottoms of it. They didn't need to be too big, they just needed to cover up that stem. And to make it much easier and not have to try to glue on the little vine, I cut the vine off of the white pumpkin. And then I just used liquid glue to adhere the stem in place. I added a little bit of foam tape to my center oval piece. And the hardest part here was lining up those polka dots. But once I got them lined up, I pressed it into place and my polka dot pumpkin is done. For my greenish, grayish, bluish pumpkin, I'm not really sure what color that is, I decided to use the Daisies embossing folder. When I placed the pumpkin in the embossing folder, I left the stem sticking out of the top so that it wouldn't be embossed, just to make it easier to glue the green stem on. I also spritzed the cardstock really quick with a little bit of water just to make sure that I got a nice deep impression from the embossing folder. Then I used an ink blending tool and added the same blackjack ink around the edges of the center oval piece and the edges of the pumpkin. Then with a very, very light hand, I dragged it over the top just to draw out that embossed pattern a little bit better. The next step again was to cut off the little vine from my bluish, greenish, grayish pumpkin and adhere with the green stem with the green vine with liquid glue. More foam tape to the back of that little center oval, and then I just popped that right into place. For the orange pumpkin, I didn't do anything fancy. I just did a little bit of the ink blending around the edges of the center oval and the edges of the pumpkin and added the green stem. Now that all my pumpkins are done and my banners are done, I brought out my fancy crocodile so that I could punch a hole in all of the banner pieces all at one time. If you don't have a crocodile, you can use a hole punch and just punch the first one so you have a guide, and then line up those circles on your second banner and punch them that way. To adhere all of the pumpkins to the banner pieces, I just used liquid glue for that. After I had the orange pumpkin adhered to the banner piece, I had die cut the word fall using the Cutie Alphabet die set and used liquid glue to adhere the letters to the front of my orange pumpkin. If I could do this over, I would have laid the letters out first before I glued them down so that I could have had the spacing a little bit better on the A and the first L. I also stamped the words happy and y'all using the mini alphabet stamp set and just cut those down to little scraps and adhered that with foam tape and liquid glue above and below the word fall. To tie the banner together, I had this natural color piece of twine, but I didn't think that I had quite enough to thread it all the way through the banner. So I decided that I would cut it into smaller strips to make sure that I had enough and to make sure that I got the spacing right in between each of the banners. Once I had the twine threaded through, I brought in my ruler to keep that spacing just right and then just tied that twine into a knot. And I did that all the way across. For the end pieces, I used the twine and just threaded it through the back and then just tied it around itself so that it would have those little hangy pieces to hang the banner. Once I had all of my banner pieces tied together, I wanted to add a little bit of floof, so I went through my ribbon stash and chose colors that would coordinate well with my banner, cut them down into pieces, and then just tied them around the twine. And I didn't do a double knot or anything, I just tied them once. Once I had all my ribbon pieces tied around the twine, I brought my scissors in and trimmed them down and cut the edges at an angle. After all the ribbon was trimmed down and the floof was floofed, I was done with my project. Here's another look at the banner. All of the products that I used are listed down in the description box below for you. Thank you so much for joining me. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you've not yet subscribed, we'd love it if you would. And don't forget to ring the bell so you're notified every time a new video is posted. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.